By way of welcoming the World Bank report, I will make some short remarks on behalf of the Roma Education Fund that were, as the chair said, originally to be delivered by the chair of REF's board, Kostel Berkuš. Our remarks are structured around the report's 4 key messages, with which we agree, I can tell you already. But at the same time, we try to address both some persistent problems and some possible solutions from REF's experiences over the last 5 years or so. So on key message 1, Roma inclusion is smart economics. Of course we agree, and we wouldn't want to do any violence to this key message, but we would argue further that the exclusion of Roma is bad economics. We would also add that the exclusion of Roma comes at the expense of social cohesion, which is of course one of the main goals of the European Union. As we've seen recently, rising extremism and intolerance in society is too often fueled by governments rather than met with the introduction of concrete measures to counteract these trends. And when governments simply do not react, it amounts to tacit consent. Furthermore, in some countries, the best recent examples being France and Italy, Roma are still scapegoats of governments which find themselves in crises of economics and legitimacy. So, to come back to a point that Belinda made a little while ago, while Roma inclusion is certainly about economic opportunities, it is also about protecting human rights and about building cohesive societies. On the second key message, that Roma want to contribute and have the potential to do so, we would add that labor force participation rates among Roma would be higher if discrimination were not a consistent barrier. And Joost made this point. But to go into it a bit more, Romani university graduates are hit hard by discrimination on the labor market. And we can see this both at the level of hiring, but also before that, in the kinds of jobs that Roma can access in the first place. To take a concrete example, the overall unemployment rate among university graduates in Romania is about 6.5%. For Romani university graduates in Romania, the unemployment rate is about 20%. And according to research by the Roma Education Fund and Gallup Romania, this discrimination seems to be strongest in cases where hiring interviews are conducted face-to-face. This same study found that 20% of Romani university graduates in Romania who are employed have a salary less than the minimum net salary for higher education, and they're employed in occupations which are essentially inferior to their qualifications and studies. So we have university graduates working as cashiers or babysitters, for example. And here we see an important role for international organizations, national governments, and other stakeholders in relation to job creation, employment, and more broadly, Roma inclusion. In REF's own case, from 2005 to 2009, we employed on a temporary basis roughly 3,000 persons working on projects granted by the Roma Education Fund. And the persons employed included school mediators, school assistants, auxiliary educational staff, project coordinators and assistants, researchers, and of course assistant researchers. And this has created jobs not only for Roma, but at the same time it's built and sustained efforts to improve Roma inclusion more broadly. As for key message 3, of course we agree there's knowledge about works for Roma integration, and in fact we think we have some of it at REF. With regard to education, desegregation is the key. At present though, segregated education continues to reproduce and reinforce the social, economic, and political exclusion of Roma. And if that news weren't bad enough, the segregation is not decreasing. And this was shown in recent studies of the Roma Education Fund and the European Roma Rights Center in Slovakia and the Czech Republic, as well as by a study conducted by the Open Society Institute in Serbia. And here, REF can only welcome the involvement of the World Bank to join the effort in dismantling the segregated way of educating Roma. REF has accumulated considerable experience in desegregation and has continued initiatives started by the Open Society Institute and Romani NGOs in Bulgaria. And through advocacy and financial support of desegregation programs, REF has helped to put desegregation on the agenda of national governments and of the European Union. Still, though, if we want to move beyond knowledge sharing on desegregation models to concrete desegregation, Roma inclusion in education requires more political will on all levels: national, regional, local, and EU. Finally, key message 4, resources are available. The problem that we see at the Roma Education Fund is that the resources are thus far, much of the time, not being spent effectively. That is, the resources are not reaching Romani communities and people in a meaningful way, where we can speak of positive systemic changes in the everyday lives of Roma. Resources are available, but many times local and national authorities choose not to attract them. This can be either because of lack of capacity, or, in other cases, because of a more simple lack of willingness to help Roma. And with this in mind, the Roma Education Fund recommends that conditionality be introduced in the allocation of structural funds. More specifically, the condition should be that countries or regions with significant Romani populations effectively include Roma from the development phase of their projects as a condition of accessing structural funds. Thank you for your attention.